Welcome back to the Unstuck movement. As always, I'm your host, Rob Z. These are true testimonies of breakthrough. Today, we have the incredible Kristan Swan with us on the podcast, and we're going to be talking self-sabotage, discernment, resilience, storytelling, having a best-case scenario way of thinking, and how we create that transformation in our lives. And Kristan, I want to jump in right away. There's certain things we live out in our life that totally go unrecognized by us. This can happen for years. It can happen for an entire lifetime. I'm curious for yourself, these common patterns that go on behind the scenes, things we don't recognize. They're kind of quietly working in the background that hold us back. What could you identify are some of those patterns that you've experienced, things that you were kind of unconscious of that held you back, that you found breakthrough in?
Yes, well, thank you for that question, Rob, and I'm delighted to be here. And I love jumping right in. I am not a very good small talk person, so I just love going right into the meat. And it makes me, when you were asking about kind of those patterns that are maybe those quieter patterns, right? I was just at a dinner last night and talking to some colleagues, and specifically, we were talking about these are a lot of people that are kind of in the fundraising space. So they're, have to be kind of out there in the public eye. And we were talking about just showing up. And I think that one of the messages that is pretty pervasive I know for myself throughout my upbringing, and then also kind of just continues as whether it's school or once you get into the professional world, is you've got to show up with 100%, right? You've got to show up in this and for me, that implies a level of perfection that is, frankly, it's just, I don't know, maybe once in a while it happens, but it really, how many times do you have, and I'm talking about anything. I'm talking about a dinner with your family, a business meeting. You may be trying to get a new client. It may be a seminar, whatever that thing is, right? That you've got to, it's an appointment and you've got to show up. And I would say, so a couple of things that I've witnessed, and I've done this myself, and then also I've definitely observed this in others, is that pressure to show up in a certain way. Sometimes people will just, remove themselves. And they'll just cancel. I can't do it. They'll reschedule, oh gosh, an emergency came up, all that kind of stuff. Or they will show up and just feel so forced in that moment that it obscures the ability to be fully present. And I remember back when I was doing landscape design, and I had a client meeting, and I wasn't far enough along in the design process, and I felt like there was a certain way that I was supposed to show up that day. And I was like, okay, I got to reschedule this. I got to reschedule it. And I just thought, yeah, I can't do that, because that doesn't set I'm too early in the relationship with this client, and that feels like that could and get in the way of those little bits of trust that we've been building. So I can't do that. So okay, if I can't do that, then how am I going to show up? And ended up, the punchline is it ended up being one of the best meetings ever, because instead of being like, okay, I've got all these great ideas for you, boop boop boop, I've got it all dialed in, I'm all ready, bam, let's go to the next stage. I showed up, and what I had realized in kind of the anxiety and processing of what am I going to do is I still had a lot more questions to ask them, about part of the reason why I wasn't far enough along is there were missing bits of information that I needed to get. So, I mean, I ended up coming to this meeting and I wasn't so on, right?
Hmm.
I kind of allowed myself to be in that what was needed, which was being curious and asking questions and having more of a conversation with them and, talking through some of the bigger concepts I had developed, but, allowing for there to be a little bit more of an exchange, which ended up being so good for me in terms of the work that I was meant to do for them, but also ended up being really good in that relationship building for us because I showed up when I said I was going to show up. And even though I didn't have exactly what they thought I was going to have for them in that moment, we were able to kind of move the project forward, right? And so I think that, so how to kind of make that more of a universal, suggestion is allow yourself to show up. Maybe you feel a little tired, maybe you feel, you're a little, maybe you're a little nervous, and so allow yourself to, to be 70%, so to speak, if we're not 100%, or 50% or whatever, and I don't know, just bring some softness, I guess is the way I feel it in my body, is when I'm, nervous and more tense. But if you could just bring some softness and just kind of some curiosity and really stay present in the moment. And I think that I think you can get some really wonderful surprises from that.
Yeah, that's it's a really good point because whenever I show up and I'm just being myself, everything falls into place because I'm being me. And oftentimes, especially if you're walking into a situation where you feel like you have to act a certain way, be a certain way, because there's something riding on it, you show up inauthentic. And I talk about this a lot. It seems to come up all the time, but like authenticity is something that people pick up on whether they realize it or not. If somebody doesn't know who you are and you're just being yourself, you can tell that compared to somebody who's you're trying to put on some sort of, like, if you would show up to that meeting, you weren't fully prepared, and it makes you start to act weird, so you're trying to like overcompensate that you're not prepared, right? So you're kind of like
Yes.
faking it now. You're making stuff up.
Oh,
You end up trying way too hard, and it's exhausting. You're exhausting yourself. Number one, you can feel that, but I think the people in the situation can also feel that. And when you have that happen with somebody, it's like you can tell something's off, and you don't know what it is, and it's not sitting well with you. Instead of that
mm-hmm.
person showing up and just being, well, like you did, honest, ask questions, figure the things out that need to get figured out, and that creates an ease with you and also with them, because now you're genuinely curious. Now you're genuinely trying to come to an answer instead of trying to pretend that you have some sort of answer that you clearly have not fully formed.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but I think about this even in social situations, or even, there can be times when, going to a family dinner, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
could be anxiety producing. Oh gosh, is what's, is my mom going to have something to say about, what I'm wearing? Is it gonna, and so again, um, kind of allowing for it to be what it's going to be,
That's what I was going to
and
say.
and just not, and I think that so many times our default is to withdraw, and it may be that we withdraw, 100% physically by, like I was saying, canceling, or we also kind of may withdraw by either becoming, um, just kind of shut down, or we can kind of do the other thing where we get so big, personality wise, we're cracking jokes or we're being sarcastic or whatever, but really what that is, kind of to mask that feeling, that more authentic self that is within us.
Yeah, it's super important. I think too, setting the intention. I'm going into the situation. I'm going to set the intention. I'm just going to let the situation be what it is, especially if there's a lot of history, past to it, whatever, and you're walking into something that you know could potentially trigger you. It's like I'm just going to let it, and it's easier said than done. But really, if you do spend that time kind of setting yourself up, like I'm just going to let things just kind of unfold how they're unfolding, not trying to control the outcomes of anything. You're going to end up being more relaxed, and you're going to end up being more of yourself. And who doesn't want that? Who doesn't? That is the best way you could show up for anything. Is just in a place of like, okay, I'm just me, and I'm just going to let it be what it is. So let's. I want to.
Yeah.
I want to step into like first. Let's pause. I want to introduce you and introduce the show, and then we're going to dive deeper into this. I really want to talk about self-sabotage. One of the biggest things that this is, I mean, we're talking about self-sabotage when we're talking about all of this, setting
Yeah.
ourselves up for failure, whether we realize it or not.
Mm-hmm.
This platform is the Unstuck movement, right? So we made this platform because I've been stuck. Kristan, I'm sure you've been stuck.
Oh,
We all find a
yes.
place in our lives where it's like, how do we get out of this? How do I find breakthrough? And I wanted real stories from true people who have these true testimonies of breakthrough to prove that it's possible for anybody to find that in their life, to get unstuck in your life. We're sponsored by the Connected Leaders Academy. Check out connectedleadersacademy.com. Over 500 heart-centered entrepreneurs from all over the world helping each other grow. And also brought to you by the Pro Podcaster Academy. If you're somebody who wants to launch your own podcast, you've been thinking about it for a long time, but all the nuts and bolts of what to do, how to decide what to talk about, all these things are holding you back. I would love to help you launch a platform that, number one, makes you the go-to authority in your space, leaves a lasting impact on people's lives, and also creates incredible personal and professional connections for you. And if you have a podcast, how do you streamline it, make it easier to execute in less time, and also monetize it so it's a real revenue generating part of your business? I'd love to help you with that at robzwentz.com. Today, Kristan Swan is with us. She helps people find clarity and connection through storytelling, reflection, and spiritual exploration. As a facilitator and author, she empowers others to notice their patterns, embrace possibility, and discover the deeper meaning in their life stories. Now, I do want to dive into your life story, Kristan, as we go through this conversation of how you got here today. But I love talking self-sabotage because we all do it. Well, maybe we don't all do it, but I definitely do it. How do we recognize maybe socially acceptable self-sabotage in daily life? These kind of things that come up. I'm setting myself up for failure, and it's like a socially acceptable kind of thing to do. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh gosh, I have been, yes, I have been a guilty as charged. So as I think that one of the ones that maybe a lot of other people can relate to too is this really this culture of busyness, right?
Mm,
And so we get, and I did specifically, I think about how if people asked me who I was, it was like, well, I'm a daughter, I'm a granddaughter, I am a mother, it was like this, all of these different roles that I played,
mm-hmm,
and they all, and what felt really good in terms of kind of a self worth kind of thing is that there was everybody needed me in some way to do something, right? And so I could I could fill my days doing very with busyness to meet all these needs from other people. And I would get a lot of social capital because gosh, you're such a good daughter, or you're such a good volunteer, or you're such a good, you know, or even, with your work, wow, you're working too. And you're, and you're the kids and all. And it was all very, I mean, it's like, I feel like I was getting gold stickers all day long, right? And so that and it was exhausting. It wasn't necessarily, and it not only was it exhausting because I was really, if someone didn't have a need, I was, I would like make something up just so that I would kind of fill that moment that I
Yeah.
had, right? And it was ultimately it was a way to to isolate myself.
Mm.
It's like, oh gosh, I'm so busy. I can't, no, I can't meet, I can't do this thing that would be like self-care, right? I can't do that thing. Or no, I'm so busy. I can't do, I'm saying, I'm saying that I want to grow my business in a certain way, but oh gosh, I don't have time to do that. And because I'm doing all these other things. So I think that that is one of the main ways that we get so much, we get a lot of accolades for being these, good people. And there is, I mean, obviously this is all within a continuum. This isn't, but I mean, is that something that you resonate with, Rob?
Well, there's definitely a difference between being of service to people
Mm-hmm.
and self-sabotaging yourself, right? You're filling some sort of unending void. And those things can look very similar. That's
Right.
interesting, right? Those two things, it's what am I doing it for, and is it draining me or filling me up? Because I know, and I'm curious about this, Chris. And as far as like moms go, because I feel like moms go through this often because you are needed, and it feels good to be needed, and you are of service. So it's good to be of service to other people. It's good to help people.
Yes.
But how do you do that without reaching the burnout place to fill yourself back up? Because and like you said, you're doing it because you're running from the things that you really know you should be doing, or you're doing it in place of things that would make you even more effective. And you might not even realize that you're doing that.
Yeah, and I would say that for myself, a lot of my running was to avoid myself. I mean, to avoid and it's not even that I knew myself well enough to know what I was avoiding, right? I mean, it's kind of
Yeah.
this. It sounds so kind of out there, but it was like, I guess the best way to explain it is I think about my upbringing, which was a little bit chaotic. And I know that I'm not unique in this, but I we moved a lot of new schools, a lot of my parents got divorced very early in my life. Just kind of there wasn't a lot of stability. There was certainly a sense of financial insecurity, as well as kind of just insecurity around kind of like what's the day to day going to bring. So much of my kind of reaction to that was, on the one hand, trying to create real structure, right? Just like
Mm.
loving having a schedule, and really so having, because I think that having kind of downtime and being at all quiet for a long time just felt so scary, because if
Mm.
it wasn't structured, then the only thing that I knew in opposition to that structure was chaos,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
which was not necessarily it wasn't true, but that had been my lived experience. That was the story I knew. Like if you aren't structuring things, and it's just going to be a whole bunch of mess and chaos.
Which there is some truth to that, right? I mean, the best place to have freedom is inside of structure, because without
Yes.
structure, freedom is just chaos. But
Right.
when it becomes like a unconscious kind of obsession, then that can that can swing the pendulum in the whole other direction, where if anything is not structured, you can't handle it properly. Is that kind of like what it was? If it wasn't structured out, then this was going to really throw you out of sorts.
Yeah, that it would somehow, that there would be this, if it wasn't structured, then I was going to lapse into this chaos, right? Which did not feel like a safe place to be.
Yeah.
However, I think the thing that maybe it's the, I'm kind of a visual person, so maybe it's the place that's in between the structure and the chaos, is that there can be stillness, right?
Yeah.
There can be those places, and you can structure in your stillness, right? I mean, you can set aside your time for meditation, or just, being quiet, or taking a walk is something that I do, but that also just taking your mind out of that busyness and allowing for that stillness. And then I think the other piece for me too was, that financial insecurity really kind of built a real hustle mentality into me, and which is fun. I mean, there's definitely like some energy that you get off of that, and I was very entrepreneurial even as, like a 12-year-old or 10-year-old. um, and it's fun and this, and but then you've got to, I mean, at a certain point, yeah, I mean, the hustle can be a self-sabotage, in that you're not really allowing enough time for that, whatever that great idea is that you have, that, that that thing that you're interested in. There is a moment where you also need to give it time to, to get established. You've got to nurture it. You've got to, just you get roots, so to speak, right? As opposed to the the constant hustle, which I always just visualize as literally running from place to place.
Yeah, so it's like you said, like being this person who was always in need kept you in this hustle kind of mindset where you never
Yeah.
had to really slow down to figure that part of it out. But it helped you to avoid the chaos. That makes a lot of sense. I want to pause to shout out the sponsor of the show. When we come back, though, I want to talk about storytelling, right? Uh, you talk about storytelling with your grandparents and the lessons that you learned from that, and how we can apply that to our lives today. I'm very interested in diving into that in 1 minute. Are you struggling to make consistent, valuable content for yourself? Do you want to have an efficient and effective way to create content that attracts the people that you want to connect with in life, the people you want to build relationships with in business? Do you want to be the go-to authority at what you do, at what you're great at? Would it be helpful for you if you had a platform that connects you to incredible people in your industry? The kind of platform that gets you leads and lands you clients without you having to beat down anybody's door or blow up anybody's inbox. Whether you're already creating content or you're desiring to start and it's something that's been kind of burning inside of you for a while, I urge you and encourage you to check out the Pro Podcaster Academy. Get started right now. Join the waitlist at robzwentz.com.
Hi, my name is Jose Escobar, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Connected Leaders Academy. We're a growing tribe, a community of entrepreneurs all over the world globally. If you're an entrepreneur and you're looking to grow personally and professionally, scale your influence, develop your skill sets, move the needle in your business, more clients, more money, more profit, the bottom line, and of course, grow your circle and your network like never before, join the Connected Leaders Academy today. Check me out on Instagram and on Facebook, the @ JASCO25. We look forward to having you join us. Take care.
Kristan, you talk about storytelling, and I love this subject because it's so important, the stories we tell ourselves. Talk about, the storytelling with your grandparents. What did that teach you, lessons that were brought into your life from that?
Yeah, well, it is the you brought up the idea of the stories that we tell ourselves, right? And the way I think about stories, just to kind of give us all a common understanding of what we're talking about, is I see kind of these three buckets for stories, right? I mean, there are those stories that we tell ourselves and it can get pretty noisy up there. And then there are those stories that we inherit or that are told to us, right? And then there are those stories that we select and choose to share with others, right? And for me, growing up and spending a significant amount of time with my grandparents was so it really it was that calm in the storm in some ways for me, especially my grandparents, my dad's parents, who were were married. I think by the time it was all said and done, about 73 years, right? They had known each other in high school. They had, they were just such, and especially at the point in time when I came along and had awareness of who they were as people. I mean, they were just they had such a beautiful friendship and respect as well as love for each other. And so, part of the story that they were telling to me was certainly those times when we would sit down and maybe look through photos, or I would ask them a question about what it was like to do this or that. But also so much of the storytelling essentially from them was really modeling a way of being, right? And it could be everything from how they recycled plastic bags. They were kind of early adopters of recycling plastic bags. And so, that really actually was a story, right? Because you have two individuals who were alive during the Great Depression, right? So recycling a plastic bag is kind of part of their story of how they grew up. And it could also be the weekly lunches that I attended with them, with their other retiree friends some of whom they had known from their professional years, that had all kind of congregated in this one area. And so it was that story of these deep friendships that had been cherished and really nurtured by having consistent, weekly lunches together. And it's not that it was, the topic of conversation wasn't heavy or anything, but it was so much of, I think, those stories, so to speak, from especially I call them my East Coast grandparents, were in just the modeling of what they were doing, kind of their living and observing that. And for my other grandmother, who was also originally from the East Coast but moved to the West Coast when I was very, very little to be with me, that in and of itself, right, is a very strong story, is which was shared with me about her choice to leave where she had lived her entire life on the East Coast to come to the West Coast because I was born and wanted to be out here by the time I think she made it in time for my first birthday, right? And so that's a powerful story of this love, essentially, and this and then also it was so fun because she grew up with 5 brothers and I had no siblings. I have no siblings, and she had 5 brothers and 1 sister, and kind of also the stories of them growing up, and it was, and that was always so fun too, is I think especially with my grandparents, is sometimes it's so hard for us to think about like our grandparents or even our own kids thinking about us as kids their age, right? It's hard for us to kind of see them in a different light. And so I think the other thing that was so great about spending time with my grandparents and kind of absorbing their stories that way, but also being told specifically their stories, is seeing people in their fullness, right? And I think that's why I love the work that I do as a workshop facilitator is bringing people together and providing prompts that can nudge people into reflecting on different times of their lives, and and then sharing that within the group. And so getting people together who may not necessarily feel like they have anything in common, they may not have ever thought to have a conversation with this other person. Maybe they would have never met them because, right, they're coming from different parts of the city or whatever. But that storytelling and our stories are, reveal the fullness of our lives and of ourselves.
Yeah, you talk about discernment, and it's really true. Like looking at reflecting on your past can bring a lot of things into clarity, and reframing the stories that you tell yourselves, right? So reframing how
Yes.
you're looking at things, because how you discern the world depends, if you let it, depends on your past experiences and how you think those things have happened, right? So rewriting those stories. My wife, great example, she was adopted, which could be something that you could carry with you as as this terrible thing that happened throughout your life, right? I didn't know my parents, and I think about that myself. I'm like, man, that would be really hard. It's amazing, and now she has amazing adopted parents, just on the best you could ask for. But for a long time, leading up to her college years, it was like the bane of her existence. Like she hid from it, she ran from it, she ran from the fact that she was adopted. She wouldn't talk about it, and she had a lot of shame around it. And then, thank God, she had this breakthrough of realizing what a gift it was. All of the amazing things, the great. I mean, number one, just the resiliency she built, um, the parents that she does have who are just incredible. How like God gave her this new like lease on life that she wouldn't have had otherwise. Who knows what it would have been like otherwise? And I see it in like just a total reframing of something that could be the most detrimental thing to you, but when you tell yourself the right story about it, everything turns around and it becomes the biggest gift, the biggest strength that you could have. And that's a choice. But we have to be able to reflect with the right story to have real discernment on it. And we can use everything from our past to where we are now to move us into the future in the most positive, powerful way, because those things help me shape who I am today. And that's easier said than done. Everybody has a different viewpoint on how everything played out for them, but we all can choose how we look at what's gone on in our past. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, certainly. I think there's a couple of things that it makes me think of is, well, so first and foremost, I'll just say that our while I believe strongly in our stories and storytelling and sharing and reflection, as you pointed out, and the way that I talk about it is our stories also do not define us. We do not have to allow them to restrict us or define us in a way, right? And how do you really, through reflection, there is an opportunity to release kind of maybe the emotional trigger that has accompanied a story, and kind of part of the reframing can be that guiding that story towards being, information, a bit of wisdom, right? That is that you now hold. So I think, and I also think, I mean, as long as I'm still here breathing in this, format, my story's not done, right? I mean, my story there is still a lot more story ahead of me. So to recognize that, and specifically in relation to the reason why you do this show, right? I mean, that I think is such a message of hope and perhaps inspiration to consider recognizing our stuckness, and then that there is, in the very next minute, we can start writing a different story.
Yeah.
And I think what I love about what you shared with your wife is, I think about, so I mentioned that my parents divorced when I was very young, and I think they separated when I was like 4, and who knows when the divorce was final, but shortly thereafter. And it wasn't necessarily a time when divorce was all around me. And so there was the story that was being told to me was, oh gosh, this is not a very good thing. This is really how unfortunate, right? And I do think that I absorbed some of that, and especially being in school where most of my classmates had intact families and stuff. It wasn't something I'd be like, oh God, I'm the child of divorce. And yet at that same time, the story that kind of I knew to be true was conflicted with that, which was that I was never one of those kids who was like, oh gosh, I hope my parents get back together. I was always kind of literally scratching my head thinking, how did these two people ever get together? Like they don't make any sense to me. And it wasn't until much later when I actually heard the actual story of them essentially both being East Coast transplants and meeting on the West Coast and getting together and finding out that there was a being that had been created, and choosing to do the right thing and get married, which ultimately wasn't the right thing for them because they didn't have any kind of relationship, so to speak, that a marriage would have needed to survive. And so I think that there's one of the things that I feel like I have been able to do, and I hope that some of my work can assist others, is trusting also kind of what you know to be true. Right? And so growing up, that always was very confusing because in my heart, I'm like, yeah, these are two people that really had no business being together. And but yet all of the stories that are getting told to me are, oh gosh, this is such a horrible and sad event.
Yeah, that's very interesting, balancing those two things out. Well, thank you for sharing all that. These topics are so important because we have to walk through these things in life, and sometimes it is not until years later where we can finally map them out and make sense of them, right? So I love to be able to, anybody listening, watching who is going through that right now, anything that's like you're holding those two things at the same time in mind, knowing that there's a process that's going to come out on the other side that it's going to make more sense to you and be something to you that's powerful, that can really help you with your life. I want to encourage people to check out your website, KristanSwan.com. They can get your journal on there, spaghetti on the wall. Is that what it's called?
Spaghetti on the wall.
I love it.
Yes. This is a great tool for just gaining some awareness about who you are and recognizing your patterns. And it's super simple. There's prompts, and 10 to 15 minutes a day. And it makes a world of difference. I just had a breakthrough this week because I do spaghetti on the wall every morning and reflect about the day that just passed. And yeah, even this week, I was like, oh, I was doing that thing that I do.
Yeah. When you go back and review your day, holy cow! It's number one. It's one of the hardest things. I don't do it all the time, but I do it sometimes. And recapping your day, like at the end of my day, it can be so hard to go back through and like know everything that happened. But then you pick up on things that you didn't notice happening throughout the day. Maybe times when you went off course, or like you find breakthroughs. So I love that. I love that you have a journal that helps people navigate through that. It's one of the most powerful things we can do. They can get that journal right now on your website, Kristan Swan. Kristan.com. Kristan, we are out of time. I want to thank you so much for being here. I want to thank you for the work that you've done for yourself, the work you do for others, and also for finding that breakthrough in your life. Another true testimony of breakthrough on the show. Until next time, this is the Unstuck Movement.